Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. My name's Alex. I want to talk to you a little bit about, title of my slides is Scaling the Data Integration Mountain, Tools, Tricks, and Tales. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about my company, Datawheel, what we do, the sorts of projects that we take on, the sorts of platforms that we build, and then give you some examples about how we're using ClickHouse and the tools that we've built on top of that. So I'm going to start by talking about Datawheel and who we are. So this is myself, the other two founders. We met at Northeastern while I was doing my undergrad. There's actually a fellow Husky in the audience here. And basically, we were doing a data visualization project at the time at Northeastern. Meanwhile, Cesar was applying to be a professor at the MIT Media Lab. He asked me to come on as a student, so I ended up studying there for 2 years. This was back in 2010. And then we started the company together with Dave in 2013. So we're about 10 years old now. We just had our 10-year anniversary back in June. And we've grown quite a bit since then. And basically what we're doing is we're building data integration tools, and we're building them both in the public sector and in the private sector. The team has grown quite a bit. This is us in our office. We're based in Cambridge, Mass. This is our office. We also have people based in Chile. And here's another outside photo. This is our office in Imnan Square in the nice warm weather, and then in the freezing cold snow. Although we haven't had much of that so far. Anyway, so the problem that we're solving and what we're doing at Datawheel is this idea that the world is producing more and more data, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And how do we get value? How do we extract value out of it? And so a lot of the tools that we've been building have been to answer that specific problem. So the solution as we see it is building tools that translate data into knowledge. And this was a big part of my master's thesis that I had written, and the tools that I had built while I was doing my undergrad as well, is this idea of how do we turn data into knowledge? How do we turn data into policy making? How do we turn data into decision making? And what are the suite of tools that we need around that to be able to perform those sorts of actions? So I'm going to use this idea of the data integration mountain, and I'm going to revisit this throughout the discussion, throughout the talk, as a sort of metaphor. And so this was generated with AI. I used DALL-E to create this. I like the image. I think it came out pretty well. And this idea of starting at the base level, that really you need to start with that integration solution. You have to start by integrating different data sets. From there, you can start distributing that, analyzing that, and eventually get up to that automation pinnacle where you can do, that's where you're doing the really fun stuff. That's where you're doing the AI, the machine learning, all of that. But really, unfortunately, it starts with the data janitorial work, the data integration. And for us, ClickHouse is actually a huge part of us doing that data integration and basically building that foundational layer from which we can do the further steps, the distribution, the analysis, and the automation. So I'm going to show an example of a few different sites out there. So first, starting with data.gov. This is a site, anyone that's used public data from the US, they've maybe used this. So this would be an example of someone coming here looking for income data. And I would argue it's not the best user experience. You come here, you search for income, they bring you to a CSV file, you can then download that, you bring that into Excel or any other tool, and then you just get a list of numbers. Same is true. This is the open data site for Argentina. You go here, you search something like income, and it's a very similar experience. And a lot of the frustration that we've had as a company as Datawheel and for the clients that come to us is this idea that a lot of these sites and a lot of the open data public platforms that are out there are built around this idea of data warehouses. This idea that as long as we organize the data according to the correct topic, then people are going to find what they need, and then they can go to the correct aisle, they get that data, they put it into their own platform, they use it for whatever they need. And we're trying to challenge that idea quite a bit, and we're instead trying to build what we call data showrooms. this idea that when you go to IKEA, they don't start you in the warehouse, they start you in the showroom. They show you what different tables look like with different wardrobes, with different chairs, with a rug. They show you all of that, they unpack all of that, and then they let you go to the warehouse, pick out exactly what you need. And this is a big reason for the way that we've shaped our company and sort of the main idea of how we've built the tools that we've built. This idea that we're going from data as files, which would be that more data warehouse approach, to thinking of data as the entry point to data stories, and thinking of organizing them around these sort of human principles, these sort of entities like geographies, industries, occupations, maybe universities or college majors, things like that. And from there, we can sort of unpack what are the variables or what are the different topics that a user may be interested in. So that when they go to the Los Angeles page, when they go to the Boston, Massachusetts page, what do they want to see? They want to see maybe income data, census data. They want to see the occupation mix that's there. And for them, they don't really care if that's coming from all different source files, if that's coming from census data, if that's coming from Bureau of Labor Statistics. For the user, they don't care. They need that entry point. And so that's why we've sort of been building this idea and using this paradigm of data as stories. And once you do that, that kind of opens a whole web of these interlocked stories. Once you're on the Boston page, you can then click on the computer programmers page. From there, you can go to the industry page that relates to those. So you're kind of building this web and you're building this now data integration platform that is both search engine optimized and is more friendly for users as well. And so these are two examples of sites that we've built. We have the OEC and we have Data USA. Data USA is a platform that we launched in 2016. We have data from every geography in the United States for all the industries, the occupations, the universities. And like I mentioned before, we basically integrate that data under the hood. We're using ClickHouse. We're then powering APIs that then go into the front end and build these different data stories that we have on top of there. So this is a little demo here. This would be someone coming to the platform, searching, in this case, going to the Raleigh, North Carolina page. From here, you have some top-level statistics. You have population, you have employment, population growth. You have this sort of narrative that gets built around this idea of a particular geography. You start to see some of these visualizations that are coming in. You see the particular comparators. So Raleigh compared to other cities in North Carolina, compared to the North Carolina state. So we're showing you all of this together in context. And from there, a user can sort of use that as a jumping off point. Maybe they want to bounce to another geography. They want to go and see data at the state level, at the county level. And this sort of opens up that discovery and that web of learning based on that individual data and that individual data story that we started there. Oops. So this is, and just to give you sort of a progression, this was the US Census site in 2017. This was Data USA, which we did in conjunction with our partners at Deloitte. We launched that. We've continued to update that. And this is actually the planned US Census site. This was from a conference that we went to, and they were handing this out to show the direction. So there's been quite a bit of impact that we've had from Data USA and from some of the other platforms that we've built. And so what I want to do now is sort of pivot to how these platforms get made and sort of how the sausage is made, so to speak. And again, revisit that data integration mountain. So we've done that integration, and now we want to start thinking about what is the distribution, what's the analysis, and how do we get eventually to that pinnacle, to that automation layer on top of there. So when we think about distribution, again, starting with that integration step that we've already done, we really start to think about first, what are the different data sources that we have? How do we understand the underlying meaning of those particular data sources? How do we build a structure, define a schema for them, eventually write those ETL scripts, ingest them into what becomes the data warehouse that we then use to power our data showroom. And of course, we want to test that and make sure we have proper validation on all of that data. And so for us, that's where that distribution starts. Now that we've done that integration, So this is our full tech stack that we have. We start with data with whether they're files, whether they're API endpoints, whether it's a database that we're connecting to. We then bring that into our Bamboo layer. This is basically a library we've written in Python, which then ingests all of that data into ClickHouse, which we're using as our data lake. And then we have a tool called Tesseract that sits on top of that, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail now, which then exposes all of those API endpoints that power all of the suite of tools we have over there on the front end. And so Tesseract, this is an OLAP or ROLAP, Relational Online Analytical Processing Server, that we wrote in Rust. We built this about 5 years ago. We've continued to maintain this. And at the end of the day, what Tesseract is doing is it allows a user to build a query through an API endpoint, send that to Tesseract, which is then going to transform that API endpoint and transform the query that the user needs, request that data from ClickHouse, send that back, and Tesseract will then transform that data into the format that the user is requesting, whether that's a CSV file, a JSON array, JSON records, whatever they need. It's going to return that back to the user, and whether that user is an API user, someone that wants programmatic access to the data, or someone on the front end that wants to see this in a visualization or somewhere else. This is sort of that flow of data that we have for all of the different front ends. And what this allows us to do by generalizing this tool, this Tesseract tool that we have, it allows us to instead prefer writing schemas instead of individual API endpoints. So what we have here on the right-hand side is basically we're describing in Data USA, we're describing one of these data cubes. This is for insurance claims. And you can see we have the different dimensions, we have the measures, we define how we're aggregating the measures, and we have all of these dimensions. And basically what Tesseract allows us to do, and what ClickHouse allows us to do as well, is it allows us to ingest all of our data at the most fine-grained disaggregate level so that our ETL is as simple as just ingesting the file, and then all of those rollups that we need, all of those marginalizing over dimensions, all of those aggregations that we need, that happens then by ClickHouse, by Tesseract automatically, by doing the proper group bys that need. So it sort of obscures that, and it allows the user not to have to worry about that. So for example, constructing a query, if we're thinking about different members that are defined in that schema, we may have geographic members, we may have industries, we may have occupations, all different dimensions. In this case, we're highlighting geographies, and you can see how there's this sort of aggregation and there's a sort of hierarchy that exists. And this is a simplified case where I'm just looking at, for example, the US from broken down into states and then eventually broken down into cities or municipalities. In actuality, the census is actually much more confusing, and it's broken down to the census block, which then aggregates up to block groups, census tracts, counties, states, divisions, regions, up to nation. And then you have all of these different orphan hierarchies off of there as well. So supporting all of this is really challenging. And again, through the Tesseract technology, we've been able to generalize a lot of this. We can support multiple dimensions that we can have for our geography. We may have, for example, just the county divisions, or we can have just the school districts or zip codes, which only relate directly back to the nation. They don't aggregate properly at all. So we've learned a lot in the process of building this Data USA tool. And again, through Tesseract and through ClickHouse, we've been able to harness the power of that very simple ETL ingestion, and then all of those rollups sort of happening on the fly. I'm going to kind of skip over these slides because I have a few more. But in general, constructing queries, you need to define the dimension. You're then able to make different cuts. We also have the ability to filter based on measures. So if you want to say, well, I want to see all the states with a population greater than 10 million or less than 10 million and greater than 1 million, things like that. We're also supporting that. And lastly, the ability to do calculations as well, have calculated members. So for example, growth is something that we do a lot, being able to say over the past year, over the past 3 years, how has the population grown, both the growth value and the growth rate itself. We can do all of that. And we have a series of libraries that we support for this. So there's a JavaScript, Python, and an R library. There are others that the community has built on top of this as well, but these are the main ones that we've been using. And just to give a little demo, because basically what I was showing you previously was the programmatic access. Really what most people are doing to access this data is using what we call Tesseract UI, which would be the UI version on top of this tool. So I'm going to switch over here and you can see, okay, great. So you can see the Tesseract UI Explorer here. And this is this is not Data USA. This is actually a different platform we run called the OEC, which is all focused on international trade data. So in this case, I'm going to look at the US data. And I'm going to toggle on these different measures. So I'm interested in the trade value, quantity, air weight, vessel weight. And then I have a series of columns. And these are going to be the drill downs that I'm going to show. So for example, if I'm only interested in, let's just show all of the states for a given year, I'm going to then filter on the most recent year. In this case, we have 2023 here. I'm going to execute this query. And so here we're going to see all of these states here, which I'll then order based on the trade value. And as we would expect, Texas, California, New York, Illinois, Michigan show up as the top exporting states. And in this case, let's say I'm interested in just an individual one of these. So keep in mind that this data is stored with all of these individual dimensions at the most raw disaggregate format. So in this case, let's say I want to see all of these different states, and I'm going to filter here, and let's filter based on a single, let's turn this off here. So in this case, we're going to say, just show me all of the products that Maine is exporting. So in this case, I'm also going to toggle on the product dimension. And so here we can see all of these products. And again, this is only for Maine. And let's also add one more cut here, which is to say we only care about exports. This is actually aggregating both exports and imports. So let's say we're only interested in exports, and we're going to sort this. So now we see, this is interesting. So Maine is exporting airport parts, orthopedic appliances, telephones, petroleum gas, crustaceans. Okay, that makes sense. A lot of lobsters coming out of Maine. And let's say we want to keep drilling down on this a little bit more. And let's add one more filter. Let's say we're only interested in crustaceans. So we're going to filter this. And we're going to say only crustaceans. And we want to drill down here on their partner. So where are these crustaceans going? So here, let's say we sort this based on trade value. So we see the majority of crustaceans here going to Canada, France, Denmark, Switzerland. So those are the markets that are importing lobsters from Maine. And so we're able to kind of peel back the onion, learn more and more about this data set just through this Tesseract tool and just through this Tesseract UI. On the front end, what I'll show here as well is, so if we want to click on just the main profile here, this would be the typical way that a user would maybe enter one of these pages, is that they would see, for example, through Google or through some other way that they run into one of these pages. We have this aggregation of all this data from Maine. And so we can see some overview text about this. We can see the visualizations themselves. We see a line chart of how those exports have changed over time. And as we scroll down, we're just going to keep seeing more and more information and visualizations. We can also see what's being imported, what's being exported, different regions, the different markets here. So this is a little demo. This is how we're using Tesseract. This is how we're using these tools and how ClickHouse is sort of powering a lot of the suite of tools that we've built at Datawheel. So I'm going to wrap up there. I have a few more slides, but I think we're kind of coming up on time. I wanted to make sure in case there were any QA. So I'll just sort of wrap up and let me know if you guys have questions.